The sun rose slow and golden over the rooftops of Cedar Ridge, the kind of neighborhood where mornings were supposed to be peaceful. Birds hopped across neatly trimmed lawns, sprinklers hissed quietly, and the air carried that crisp coolness before the day's heat would take over. Marcus Johnson stood in his kitchen, sipping on his first cup of coffee, letting the warmth ease into him. He had the day planned: mow the backyard, finish his son's basketball hoop setup, maybe grill something by evening. After years of structure, deployment, and routine as a Navy man, civilian life had its slower rhythm, and Marcus cherished it. But that rhythm shattered when the pounding began. It wasn't a casual knock, nor the hurried knock of a neighbor in need. It was deliberate, heavy, the kind of pounding meant to rattle nerves and establish dominance. The door trembled against the blows. Marcus set his cup down slowly, instincts snapping back into place. His muscles coiled, his mind sharpened. You didn't survive years in the Navy without learning to read a threat, and every sound from that door screamed one. His son Daniel was upstairs getting ready for school. Marcus called out, "Stay put, son," as he moved toward the door. He pulled it open, and there they were. 3 men standing on his porch like they owned the place. They wore dark, tactical gear, black boots polished but not scuffed, and badges clipped to their vests. The badges caught the morning light, gleaming like polished brass, but Marcus's trained eyes immediately clocked what was wrong. Real law enforcement badges had detail, embossing, authenticity. These looked like something ordered off the internet, shiny enough to impress from a distance, but flimsy in truth. "Mr. Johnson," the man in front barked, his voice low and commanding, though Marcus caught the faintest waver underneath. "By order of the HOA, you're being evicted, effective immediately. You have to vacate this property." Marcus didn't flinch. He let the silence hang in the air, staring at the man with the kind of measured calm that made lesser men nervous. The leader shifted slightly, uncomfortable under Marcus's gaze. "HOA?" Marcus finally said, his voice steady. "Evicting." "Me?" He let out a dry chuckle. "That's funny. I've lived here for years. Paid every due on time. I know every member on that board personally. Never seen you at a single meeting." One of the other men stepped forward, younger, more aggressive. His jaw clenched, and he jabbed a finger toward Marcus's chest. "Don't play games. This is official. You're trespassing on HOA property now. Gather your things and leave." Marcus's eyes flicked down at the clipboard in the man's hand. A few crumpled sheets of paper sat clipped on, words scribbled in messy handwriting. No legal headers, no court stamps, nothing that would hold up in front of a judge. He almost laughed at how pathetic the attempt was. But it wasn't funny. It was dangerous. Men like this didn't need legitimacy. They thrived on fear and the hope that their victims wouldn't question them. "I'll ask again," Marcus said, his voice deepening. "Where's the paperwork? The legal paperwork. Show me a judge's signature, a court order, anything real." The leader smirked, as if amused. He waved the clipboard. "This is all the paperwork we need. The HOA authorized it. If you don't comply, we'll remove you by force." Marcus felt his blood heat. The audacity of it all, on his porch, in front of his son, in the neighborhood he worked so hard to build a life in. But he didn't move. He stood tall, his presence, alone, commanding space. Years of military training didn't leave a man. Even in civilian clothes, Marcus radiated authority, discipline, and power. Inside, Daniel's footsteps creaked on the stairs. "Dad? What's happening?" his young voice called out. Marcus turned his head slightly. "Stay upstairs, son," he ordered. His tone left no room for argument. Daniel froze, but the fear in his voice sliced through Marcus's chest. The imposters noticed, their lips curling into mocking grins. One leaned sideways, trying to glimpse Daniel. "You don't want your kid to see this, old man," he sneered. Marcus shifted his body, blocking their view, his jaw tightening. In that moment, his decision crystallized. These men weren't just frauds. They were predators. They chose him, a black man, likely thinking he'd roll over, that he'd fear authority enough to comply without question. They thought intimidation would work because it always had for them. But they'd picked the wrong house. "Let me explain something," Marcus said slowly, his voice as steady as steel. "This is my house. I earned it. I bought it. I paid for it with my blood, my sweat, and years serving this country. You don't belong here, so you'd better turn around and walk away before this gets ugly." The leader chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "You think you scare us? We're the authority here, and we're giving you a chance to walk away clean. Don't test us." That was the moment Marcus realized exactly what kind of men they were. Not professionals, not officers, just bullies in costume hiding behind cheap badges and empty threats. He'd faced real danger, men with real weapons, real power, real training. These guys didn't even stand in formation properly. Their stances were loose, undisciplined, their eyes darting nervously. But arrogance made them reckless, and reckless men could still do damage. Marcus's hand itched toward his, phone in his pocket. His brothers, the men he'd served with, men who had his back in the deadliest corners of the world, had always told him, "Call, and we'll come." He never thought he'd need them in his quiet suburban life, but as he looked at the smug faces of the imposters, he knew today was that day. Still, he didn't show his hand yet. Instead, he leaned closer to the leader, lowering his voice just enough that it forced the man to focus. "You've made a mistake. A big one. You think you can play dress up and scare me out of my own home? You don't know who you're dealing with. But you're about to find out." The man sneered, but Marcus caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It was small, but it was there. The pounding of Marcus's heart wasn't from fear. It was from control, the kind of razor-sharp control drilled into him from years of missions where one wrong move meant death. He had to protect his son, his home, his dignity, and he would. As the imposters shifted on his porch, trying to maintain their false authority, Marcus slid a hand into his pocket. His fingers brushed the phone, and with a practiced movement, he pressed the single number saved for emergencies. The line clicked. "They're here," Marcus said quietly. And with those two words, the balance of power began to shift, because somewhere, not far from that quiet little street, 6 men heard the call. 6 men who had once fought beside Marcus, who owed him their lives as he owed them his, were already moving. Men who didn't wear fake badges because they didn't need them. Men who were real warriors, trained to end battles before they began. Marcus looked back at the imposters, his calm unbroken. "You boys better pray my friends take their time getting here." The morning air grew heavier, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the storm that was about to descend. The silence that hung in the air after Marcus ended that brief call was heavier than the pounding knock had been moments earlier. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and locked his eyes on the imposters still standing inside his doorway. They didn't know what he'd just set in motion. They thought they were still in control. The leader smirked, clearly mistaking Marcus's calmness for hesitation. "You think one phone call changes anything? We said pack your things. You're done here." Marcus didn't move. His breathing was slow, measured, the kind of rhythm soldiers fall into before combat. His son's footsteps creaked on the stairs. Again. Daniel hadn't listened, peeking around the corner with wide eyes. His face was pale, caught between confusion and fear. "Dad, are these guys real cops?" Daniel whispered. Marcus's gut clenched, not from fear, but from the thought of his son seeing men try to humiliate him in his own home. He turned his head slightly, not taking his eyes off the 3 intruders. "Go back upstairs, Daniel, now." The youngest imposter chuckled cruelly. "Listen to your daddy, kid. Best you don't watch what happens next." Marcus moved then. Not aggressively, but with a precision that made all three men stiffen. He stepped in front of Daniel's line of sight, his broad shoulders shielding his boy. His voice dropped, quiet but carrying the weight of command. "You don't ever talk to my son again." The second man, the twitchy younger one with the clipboard, snorted and tried to puff himself up. "You think you can stand there and stop us? There's three of us. One of you. Don't matter if you used to be military or whatever story you want to sell." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "I don't have to sell a story. My life speaks for itself." The leader motioned for the others to spread out. They stepped further into the living room, boots heavy on the polished wood floor. Marcus didn't retreat. His posture was calm, but his every muscle was ready. He knew if they lunged, he could take at least one down before the others got to him. But he didn't want Daniel caught in the chaos. Timing was everything, and Marcus had already made the call. Minutes stretched long, filled only with the sound of Daniel's nervous breaths from upstairs and the scrape of the imposter's boots. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower buzzed faintly. Life in Cedar Ridge went on as though nothing unusual was happening, while inside Marcus's house a battle line was quietly being drawn. Then it came, the faintest hum in the distance. Engines. Deep, controlled, unmistakable to anyone who knew the sound of tactical vehicles moving in unison. Marcus's lips twitched upward, the barest flicker of a smile. He didn't need to look at his watch. His brothers were punctual, as always. The imposters hadn't noticed yet. They were too busy posturing. The leader jabbed a finger toward Marcus. "Last chance. You either walk out on your own 2 feet, or we drag you out. Which is it?" Before Marcus could answer, the sound outside grew louder. 6 SUVs rolled onto the quiet suburban street, their engines growling in perfect rhythm. Tires crunched against the pavement as the convoy came to a halt directly in front of Marcus's house. Doors swung open, not rushed, not sloppy, but in sync, like clockwork. The imposters froze. Their arrogance faltered as 6 men stepped out, each one exuding a quiet, lethal confidence. They weren't in uniform, but they didn't need to be. Their presence alone was enough to make the air feel heavier. Broad shoulders, squared jaws, movements precise as though choreographed. Tattoos peeked from under sleeves, stories of deployments etched into skin. Their eyes carried that look only warriors had, hard, steady, unflinching. Marcus exhaled softly, relief threading through the steel of his posture. "Right on time," he murmured. One of the SEALs, Torres, tall with a scar slicing across his jawline, was the first to speak. He strolled up the path casually, but there was nothing casual about the way his gaze dissected the scene inside the house. "Well, well," Torres drawled, his voice low, edged with amusement. "Looks like we've got ourselves a situation." The imposters exchanged quick, panicked glances. The leader tried to regain control, stepping toward the doorway. "This is HOA business. Stay out of it." That earned him a deep, rumbling laugh from another SEAL, Carter, a barrel-chested man whose calm grin only made him more intimidating. "HOA business? Man, you really think you're fooling anyone with that costume party outfit?" He tapped the fake badge on the man's chest with a single finger, then let his hand drop in a way that made the leader step back instinctively. The imposter's earlier bravado crumbled. Their shoulders stiffened and their eyes darted around, calculating escape routes. The SEALs moved faster, stepping into the house with an ease that spoke of years clearing rooms in far deadlier environments. They spread out, 6 of them, surrounding the imposters without raising their voices or weapons. Their control was absolute. Daniel, peeking from the stairs, gasped. "Dad, who are they?" Marcus turned, just enough to meet his son's eyes. For the first time that morning, he allowed a small smile. "They're my brothers, son. And when brothers show up, the fight's already over." Torres leaned against the doorframe, folding his arms. "You boys really thought you could walk into a decorated veteran's house and throw him out? In this neighborhood?" He shook his head slowly. "Wrong guy, wrong house. Worst decision of your lives. The imposter with the clipboard tried. One last bluff. We're armed, you know. We can handle ourselves. A quiet chuckle rippled through the SEALs. One of them, Mason, stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of truth. So are we. The difference is, we know how to use it, and we don't miss. The imposters paled. Their hands twitched near their belts, but the SEALs were faster. In less than 2 seconds, Carter disarmed one, stripping a cheap pistol from his holster with practiced ease. The weapon clattered to the floor, useless. The others followed suit, their fake gear dismantled and tossed aside before they could even react. Marcus stood tall, watching the transformation. The men who'd swaggered onto his porch minutes ago now looked small, pathetic, caught in a trap they didn't understand. The SEALs didn't need to shout, didn't need to flex. They radiated a quiet power that crushed bravado better than any weapon. The leader tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. You can't do this. We're with the HOA enforcement division. That was the final straw. Torres's laugh cut him off, sharp and humorless. HOA doesn't have an enforcement division, but we do, and trust me, we enforce harder than you can even imagine. Marcus stepped forward then, finally closing the space. His presence, combined with the wall of SEALs behind him, was overwhelming. He stopped inches from the leader, his voice low enough that only the man could hear. You thought you could scare me in front of my son. You thought you could take what I bled for. But you made the mistake of thinking I stood alone. The leader's lips trembled, but no words came. Daniel, watching from above, felt something shift inside him. The fear he'd carried when those men barged in was dissolving, replaced by awe. He'd always known his father was strong, but seeing him like this, unshaken, respected by warriors who carried themselves like legends, was something else entirely. The imposters were corralled into the center of the room, surrounded on all sides. The SEALs didn't even look tense. To them, it was routine, another mission executed with precision. Marcus gave a single nod. Outside, Torres ordered. His voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. The imposters didn't dare argue. As they were herded toward the door, Carter leaned close to Marcus, murmuring so only he could hear. You good, brother? Marcus nodded once. Better now. Thanks for coming. Always, Carter replied, clapping him on the shoulder. Outside, the convoy of SUVs loomed like silent sentinels. The imposters were lined up against the curb, stripped of their fake weapons, their cheap badges lying discarded in the grass. Neighbors had begun peeking out of windows, whispering, phones pressed to ears. Word was spreading fast. Something was happening at Marcus Johnson's house, and it wasn't good for the men in black. Marcus stepped onto his porch, Daniel now at his side. The boy's eyes were still wide, but the fear was gone. He whispered, Dad, you didn't even have to fight them. Your friends. They just showed up, and it was over. Marcus looked down at his son, his voice quiet but steady. That's the thing about real strength, Daniel. You don't always have to shout or throw a punch. Sometimes, all it takes is showing up. Behind him, the SEALs stood like a wall, watching as the imposters sat hunched on the curb, stripped of their power. The balance had shifted, permanently. And as the distant wail of real police sirens finally began to cut through the morning air, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The neighborhood had never seen anything like it. Cedar Ridge was the kind of quiet suburban community where the most dramatic event of the week was someone forgetting trash pickup day or kids playing basketball too late into the evening. Yet now, on a Tuesday morning, 6 black SUVs lined the street like armored guardians. 6 men stood at ease but radiated a presence that made even the nosiest neighbor hesitate before pulling their blinds back any farther. And at the center of it all were 3 imposters, once smug, now sitting hunched on the curb like children caught stealing cookies. The SEALs moved like a unit, even though there was no battlefield, no mission briefing. Each one took a position around the imposters, their eyes sharp, their stances unyielding. They didn't have to speak much. Their silence was its own weapon. For men trained to face down enemies halfway across the world, corralling a few fake cops was little more than a warm-up. Marcus stood on the porch, his son Daniel pressed close to his side. The boy's eyes were wide, drinking in every detail, his young mind engraving this moment into memory. Marcus placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. It was firm but reassuring, the kind of grip that said, "You're safe. I've got you." The imposters looked small now. Their tactical gear, once meant to intimidate, seemed almost like costumes under the cold scrutiny of real warriors. One of the SEALs, Torres, crouched down in front of the leader. His scar caught, the morning light as he spoke in a low, deliberate tone. "Tell me something. Did you really think this was going to work? Walking up in your Halloween uniforms, thinking you could muscle out a man like Marcus?" The leader tried to maintain composure, but his voice cracked. We were just following orders." "Orders?" Torres's laugh was short, humorless. "From who? Some clown who told you an HOA can evict homeowners at gunpoint? You picked the wrong man in the wrong neighborhood. That's not orders, that's suicide." The SEALs chuckled quietly, but there was no warmth in the sound. The imposters squirmed. Carter, the barrel-chested SEAL with a voice like gravel, crossed his arms. "You know what the problem with you types is? You think intimidation is power, but you've never seen the real thing. You've never stood in the desert with 100 men trying to end you. You've never been outnumbered 10-1 and walked. Some away anyway. You've never had brothers who'd bleed beside you." He leaned down, his face inches from one of the imposters. "That's power. Not this cheap act you pulled." The imposter's eyes darted around, desperate, but there was no escape. The SEALs closed every gap. Daniel tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, what's going to happen to them?" Marcus looked down at him, his voice steady, calm, the kind of tone that reassured even when the truth was harsh. "They're going to face consequences, real ones, not the kind they thought they could hand out. Because when you pretend to be something you're not, and you hurt people in the process, the truth always finds you." The faint rise of sirens cut through the morning air, distant but growing. Real law enforcement was on its way. One of the neighbors must have called, or perhaps the SEALs had already made arrangements. Either way, the circle was closing in on the imposters. But before the cruisers arrived, the SEALs decided to leave their own mark. Mason, the quietest of the group, stepped forward. He had a way of moving that drew attention without him saying a word. His eyes locked on the imposters, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and chilling. "Do you know who you tried to evict? Marcus Johnson. He's not just a homeowner. He's not just a father. He's a man who carried brothers out of fire, who saved lives while you were playing dress-up. And you thought you could walk into his house like you owned it? You're lucky we're not overseas, because if we were..." He let the sentence hang, heavy and unfinished. The imposters swallowed hard, their earlier arrogance completely gone. The first cruiser rolled into the neighborhood then, lights flashing silently. It was followed by two more. The neighbors, emboldened by the presence of real police, peeked out openly now. Curtains twitched, phones recorded from porches. Everyone wanted to see what was happening. The officers who stepped out of the cruisers slowed when they saw the scene. 6 imposing men standing like a wall. 3 imposters lined up against the curb, and Marcus standing tall on his porch with his son at his side. It didn't take long for them to figure out who was who. One officer approached cautiously. "Morning, gentlemen. Looks like you've already got things handled." His eyes flicked to Marcus. "These the suspects?" Marcus nodded. "Caught them trying to pass themselves off as HOA enforcement. Tried to evict me without a single legal document. They came armed, too." The officer's jaw tightened. He looked at the imposters with disdain. "We've had reports about a crew running this scam in nearby counties. Looks like we finally got lucky." Torres smirked. "Lucky? No. They picked the wrong man and the wrong house. That's not luck. That's justice catching up." The officers cuffed the imposters, reading them their rights as neighbors whispered and filmed. The leader tried one last time to protest, sputtering about authority and misunderstandings, but no one listened anymore. His words fell flat in the morning air. As the squad cars pulled away, Marcus felt his son's small hand slip into his. Daniel's grip was firm, almost trembling with leftover adrenaline. He looked up at his father with eyes that glistened, not from fear now, but from something deeper, admiration. "Dad, I've always known you were strong, but today I saw it." His voice wavered, but his gaze was steady. "You didn't back down, not even when they came in your house." Marcus crouched down so they were eye level. He placed both hands on Daniel's shoulders, his voice soft but steady. "Listen to me, son. Strength isn't about shouting the loudest or fighting the hardest. It's about standing your ground when you know you're right. It's about protecting the people who matter. And it's about knowing when you're not alone." He glanced at the SEALs, still standing like sentinels, then back at his boy. "Never forget, you're never alone if you stand for the truth." Daniel nodded, his chest puffing up with quiet pride. The SEALs began to gather, preparing to leave. They didn't linger or demand thanks. Their job was done, and men like them didn't need applause. Still, each of them took a moment to clasp Marcus's shoulder, a wordless gesture of brotherhood. Carter ruffled Daniel's hair, making the boy grin despite everything. Torres was the last to speak before heading back to the SUVs. "You did good, brother. Called us when you needed us. That's what family's for." Marcus nodded. "I couldn't have asked for more." The engines roared to life again, the convoy pulling away with military precision. One by one, the SUVs disappeared down the street until silence returned. The neighbors slowly withdrew, the blinds lowering, the porches emptying. Cedar Ridge went back to its quiet rhythm, but it would never look at Marcus Johnson the same way again. That night, the house was still. Daniel sat on the porch steps, staring up at the stars as crickets sang in the grass. Marcus joined him, lowering himself onto the step with the weariness of a man who'd carried more than his share of burdens. The air smelled of cut grass and distant barbecue. "Dad," Daniel said softly. "Yeah, son? I think I learned something today." Marcus glanced at him, curious. "What's that?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Never mess with a man who has 6 SEALs for friends." Marcus laughed, the sound deep and unshakable. It rolled out into the night, carrying with it the relief, the pride, and the unbreakable bond of a father who had proven to his son and to his enemies that strength, honor, and brotherhood would always win. The battle was over. The home was safe. And the story of that day would be told in Cedar Ridge for years, whispered in admiration and disbelief. But for Marcus and Daniel, it was simpler than that. It was about family, by blood, and by choice, and the knowledge that when the world tried to break them, they stood together, unshaken, and that was the end.